Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Listen, if you think working on a deep space research station sounds glamorous, you've been watching too many recruitment videos. The reality? It's freeze-dried everything, recycled air that tastes like someone's gym socks, and windows that show you just how much nothing exists between you and the nearest habitable planet. But hey, at least the view's consistent. Jennifer stood at the observation window of research station Quilanthy 9, stirring a pouch of what the label optimistically called oatmeal with berry medley. The berries were synthetic. The oatmeal was questionable. The medley was a straight-up lie. She'd been out here for 8 months, studying alien behavioral patterns, and honestly, the most interesting pattern she'd noticed was her own. Wake up, caffeinate, pretend the food tastes like food, stare at alien creatures through reinforced glass, repeat. The station orbited Kulanth Minor, a frozen moon that made Antarctica look like a beach resort. Outside, the temperature hovered around -200 degrees. Inside, the heating system worked just well enough to keep everyone alive, and just poorly enough to keep everyone miserable. The whole facility was a monument to the galaxy's commitment to scientific progress and its complete disregard for creature comforts. But the real reason Jennifer was here, the reason she'd signed a 2-year contract and left Earth's coffee shops and actual weather behind, was currently visible through the Habitat Dome's transparent aluminum walls. 3 Quilanthy cubs. Now, calling them cubs was a bit like calling a velociraptor a lizard, technically accurate, wildly misleading. The Quilanthy were hexapedal predators from a high-gravity world, covered in dense fur that shifted colors with their moods, equipped with 6 limbs that could rotate in ways that made human shoulders hurt just watching. They had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, giving them nearly 360-degree vision, and their jaws could crack open the shell of a Quilanthy stone nut, which was basically a rock that happened to have nutrients inside. The cubs were juveniles, about the equivalent of human 5-year-olds in development, though nobody was entirely sure, because the Quilanthy had only opened diplomatic relations with the galactic community about 15 years ago. These 3, unnamed because the Quilanthy apparently didn't name their offspring until they reached maturity, were part of a groundbreaking study on cross-species intelligence development, which was a fancy way of saying, let's see how smart these kids are and whether they can learn to work with aliens. Jennifer watched them through the glass. One was grooming its fur with 2 of its middle limbs, while the other 4 supported its weight. Another was investigating a puzzle box the handlers had left, turning it over with the kind of focus Jennifer usually reserved for trying to figure out which station manual had the actual emergency procedures and which one was just someone's idea of a joke. The third was just sitting there, staring at nothing, which was either deep contemplation or the alien equivalent of spacing out during math class. She took another bite of her breakfast, chewed, swallowed, tried not to think about what real berries tasted like, and checked her schedule on her wrist display. Equipment maintenance in Habitat 3, data compilation for the weekly report, and a meeting with the Quilanthy handlers about updated feeding protocols. Feeding protocols. Right. The cubs ate on a strict schedule, monitored by their handlers, 2 adult Quilanthy named Grendnix and Bolmanth, who'd come from the homeworld specifically to oversee their species' young. Every meal was measured, timed, and logged. The food was nutritionally optimized. The portions were calculated down to the gram. It was all very scientific, very professional, and very boring for 3 juvenile predators who probably would have preferred to chase something and rip it apart with their teeth. But that was xenobiology for you. Take something wild and wonderful, put it in a box, and measure it until you understand it. Jennifer got it. She did. She'd spent 6 years in university doing exactly that. But sometimes, watching those cubs poke at their perfectly balanced meals with the enthusiasm of a human kid faced with steamed broccoli, she wondered if understanding something meant you had to make it miserable first. Her wrist display chimed. Habitat 3. Pressure check required. Jennifer sighed, sealed her breakfast pouch, still half full because there was only so much synthetic berry medley a human could take, and headed for the airlock. The station was a wheel and spoke design, with the habitats arranged around the outer ring for centrifugal gravity. Her quarters were in spoke 5, the habitats were in ring section 2, and the whole thing rotated just fast enough to make you dizzy if you thought about it too hard. She grabbed her toolkit from the locker, cycled through the first airlock, walked the corridor to the habitat section, and stopped at the entrance to Habitat 3. The habitat dome itself was huge, had to be to give the cubs enough space to move naturally. Coelanthi were climbers, hunters, built for three-dimensional thinking. The habitat had artificial trees, rock formations, platforms at various heights, and a climate control system that mimicked the seasonal changes of their homeworld. It was basically a very expensive terrarium for very dangerous children. Jennifer keyed in her access code, waited for the pressure equalization, and stepped into the first chamber. Standard protocol. Never enter the main habitat without checking the environmental seals first. The cubs were on the other side of the inner barrier, visible but separated. They'd noticed her. All 3 heads turned, all 12 eyes focused on the human in the doorway. She waved. It was stupid. They probably didn't understand the gesture. But she did it anyway. The equipment panel was on the left wall, next to the emergency oxygen supplies that everyone hoped they'd never need. Jennifer pulled out her diagnostic scanner, started running through the pressure seal checklist. Seal integrity. Good. Atmospheric composition. Within tolerance. Temperature regulation. Functional. Backup systems. Green across the board. Boring. Exactly as it should be. She was halfway through the secondary systems check when the alarm went off. Not the, "oh no, everyone's gonna die" alarm. The slightly less terrifying but still concerning alarm that meant a pressure door had malfunctioned somewhere in the section. Jennifer's wrist display lit up with a schematic. Inner barrier, Habitat 3, Northwest Seal. Which was, of course, right where she was standing. The door behind her sealed automatically. Station safety protocols, and the inner barrier in front of her started to retract because the system had decided that maintaining pressure in the main habitat was more important than keeping the humans separated from 3 juvenile alien predators. Jennifer had about 5 seconds to decide whether to trust the emergency override or just accept that she was about to have company. She chose acceptance, mostly because the override panel was on the other side of the retracting barrier, and she wasn't fast enough to reach it. The barrier slid open. The cubs stared at her. She stared at them. Nobody moved. Well, this was awkward. Jennifer cleared her throat. "So, hi. Don't suppose you guys speak standard?" The cubs blinked at her, 8 eyes total doing a weird cascade thing that was probably their version of confusion. One of them, the one that had been investigating the puzzle box, took a cautious step forward, lowering its body slightly. Not aggressive, just curious. She was still holding her breakfast pouch. The synthetic berry smell was apparently very interesting to a Coelanthi nose because suddenly all 3 cubs were focused on her hand, with the kind of attention usually reserved for prey animals. Their fur rippled, shifting from the neutral gray-brown to something with streaks of reddish-orange. Excitement? Hunger? Jennifer's handbook on Quilanthy color language was in her quarters, being useless. "It's just oatmeal," she said, keeping her voice calm. "Terrible oatmeal. You wouldn't like it." The cubs didn't seem convinced. One of them made a sound, this low, chittering thing that might have been a question, or might have been the Quilanthy equivalent of "gimme, gimme, gimme." The other two echoed it, and suddenly Jennifer was surrounded by three waist-high alien predators who very much wanted to know what the weird human was eating. She looked at her breakfast pouch, looked at the cubs, looked at the sealed door behind her that wasn't going to open until maintenance cleared the malfunction, looked at the cubs again. They were waiting, just sitting there, all 12 eyes, focused on her, occasionally glancing at each other in a way that felt weirdly coordinated, like they were having a conversation she couldn't hear. Jennifer made a decision that would absolutely violate about 18 different research protocols. She opened the pouch, carefully extracted one of the synthetic berries, about the size of a marble, dark purple, probably containing more chemicals than actual fruit, and held it out. The nearest cub, the curious one, leaned forward, sniffed. Its tongue, which was way longer than Jennifer had expected, flicked out and took the berry with surprising delicacy. Chewed once, swallowed, then sat back down and looked at her expectantly. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Jennifer muttered. But she pulled out 2 more berries, offered them to the other cubs, watched as they did the exact same thing. Take, taste, swallow, sit, wait. They weren't begging. They weren't demanding. They were waiting for permission. Jennifer sat down cross-legged on the habitat floor, which was definitely not protocol, and placed the pouch in front of her. The cubs edged closer, forming a loose semicircle. She ate a spoonful of oatmeal. They watched. She pulled out another berry, ate it herself. They kept watching. Then she held out 3 berries, one for each of them. They took them, gently as before, and this time something else happened. The cubs glanced at each other, then back at Jennifer, and made this soft thrumming sound that vibrated in her chest. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't scared. It was, she realized, with a weird jolt of recognition, happy. She'd just shared food with 3 alien predator cubs, and they were treating it like she'd invited them to a birthday party. Jennifer laughed, couldn't help it. The sound startled them for a second, but then one of them, the one that had been spacing out earlier, made a noise that was almost a laugh too, this huffing chitter that the other 2 immediately copied. They were mimicking her. "Okay," Jennifer said, still grinning despite the fact that she was absolutely going to get in trouble for this. "Okay, you're officially the weirdest thing that's happened to me this month, and I once watched a Glorbian try to eat a wrench." The cubs didn't respond, because of course they didn't. But they stayed there in their little semicircle, watching her finish her terrible breakfast, with the kind of attention that made her feel like maybe it wasn't so terrible after all. When maintenance finally cleared the malfunction and the barriers reset, Jennifer returned to her side of the habitat, logged the equipment check as complete, and absolutely did not mention the part where she'd turned breakfast into a cross-species social experiment. She told herself it was a one-time thing, an accident, an anomaly. She told herself the cubs would forget about it by tomorrow. She was wrong on both counts. The next morning, Jennifer woke up to her alarm, contemplated the existential horror of another day eating freeze-dried food products, and seriously considered just staying in bed. But xenobiologists didn't get paid to sleep in. Barely got paid at all, actually. But that was a complaint for another time. So she dragged herself vertical, went through her morning routine, and heated up another pouch of the oatmeal-adjacent substance. She had equipment checks in Habitat 1 today. Completely different section. Nowhere near the cubs. Except her route to Habitat 1 took her past Habitat 3. And the observation window was right there. And she was only human, so obviously she looked. All 3 cubs were sitting in the exact spot where she'd sat yesterday. Just sitting there, facing the window, waiting. Jennifer stopped walking, stared, checked her chronometer. Feeding time wasn't for another 2 hours. The cubs should have been doing cub things, climbing, playing, investigating their enrichment items. Instead, they were positioned in a perfect semicircle, like they were holding seats at a concert. One of them, she was pretty sure it was the curious one from yesterday, spotted her through the glass. Its fur rippled through a sequence of colors, gray to orange to something almost golden. Then it made that thrumming sound, quieter this time, but she could still feel it through the reinforced barrier. The other 2 immediately turned toward the window, saw her, started thrumming too. "Oh no," Jennifer said to nobody. "No, no, no. That was a one-time thing. We are not doing this." The cubs kept thrumming. She stood there for a solid 30 seconds, having an argument with herself. The responsible scientist part of her brain said, "Walk away, do your job, don't interfere with research subjects." The part of her brain that had watched too many videos of puppies doing adorable things said, "But look at them. They're waiting for you, you monster." Jennifer compromised by doing her job first and feeling guilty about it the entire time. Habitat 1's equipment check took 90 minutes. The whole time, she kept thinking about 3 juvenile aliens sitting in a semicircle, waiting for a human who wasn't coming. It was ridiculous. They were research subjects. She was a scientist. There were protocols. There were reasons for those protocols. She finished the check, logged her report, and walked straight back to Habitat 3. The cubs were still there, still waiting. Their fur had shifted to darker colors, muted browns and grays. The thrumming had stopped. They just sat there, occasionally glancing at each other, then back at the window. Jennifer pulled out her comm unit, keyed into the habitat's internal systems, and checked the feeding logs. The morning meal had been delivered on schedule, placed in the usual location. The cubs hadn't touched it. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered. She should have reported it, should have contacted the handlers, let them deal with it, stayed out of the situation entirely. Instead, she went to the commissary, grabbed an extra breakfast pouch. This one alleged to contain scrambled eggs, which was optimistic, and headed for the habitat access corridor. The pressure door malfunction from yesterday had been fixed. Everything was sealed, secure, completely by the book. She keyed in her access code, waited for the first airlock to cycle, stepped into the antechamber. The cubs heard the door. All 3 heads snapped toward the sound. Their fur exploded into that golden-orange color, and the thrumming started up again, loud enough that she felt it in her bones. Jennifer opened the inner barrier manually this time, on purpose, which was definitely against at least 3 regulations, and stepped into the main habitat. The cubs didn't rush her, didn't jump or pounce, or do any of the aggressive behaviors the safety briefings had warned about. They just walked over, slowly, and arranged themselves in the same semicircle formation as yesterday. Then they sat and waited. Jennifer sat down across from them, opened her breakfast pouch, and ate a bite of what was, theoretically, eggs. The cubs watched every movement. She pulled out a piece of the synthetic protein, shaped like a sausage, tasting like sadness, broke it into 3 pieces, and offered them. The cubs took them with the same careful delicacy as before, chewed, swallowed, made happy, thrumming sounds. Then they got up, walked over to their own untouched breakfast, and started eating. Jennifer sat there on the habitat floor, holding a pouch of terrible eggs, watching 3 alien cubs finally eat their morning meal, and had the uncomfortable realization that she'd just accidentally trained them, or they'd trained her. It was honestly hard to tell which. She finished her breakfast while they finished theirs, and the whole time she was thinking, "This is bad. This is a problem. This is going to cause complications." But also, when was the last time breakfast felt like something other than a chore? When she left the habitat, sealing the barriers behind her, the cubs followed her to the window and watched until she was out of sight. This became the routine. Every morning, Jennifer would show up at Habitat 3 with 2 breakfast pouches, one for her, one to share. The cubs would be waiting in their semicircle. She'd sit, they'd sit, she'd eat, she'd share, they'd eat their own food. Sometimes she'd talk to them, just casual one-sided conversation about her day, about Earth, about how the coffee situation on this station was a crime against humanity. They'd listen, heads tilting in that way that suggested they were processing her voice patterns, learning her rhythms. She started noticing differences between them. The curious one, she mentally named him Whisper because he made these soft clicking sounds when he was thinking, always took the first share of food. The energetic one, Bounce, obviously, because he never stopped moving, would eat his portion and immediately want to show her something. A new climbing route he'd discovered, a way to open the puzzle boxes faster, a hiding spot that the handlers definitely didn't know about. The quiet one, Stare, because those 4 eyes saw everything, would eat slowly, watching her the entire time, like he was memorizing her. It was Stare who started bringing her things, little offerings, a smooth pebble from the rock formations, a shed piece of fur, once an entire puzzle box that he'd managed to completely disassemble. Jennifer would accept them because refusing seemed rude, and Stare would make this satisfied thrumming sound like he'd just completed a very important transaction. "You know I can't keep these, right?" she told him one morning, holding up a particularly nice pebble. "I don't even know what I'd do with a rock. Put it on my desk? Start a collection? Here's the rock an alien child gave me. It's my most prized possession?" Stare just stared at her, thrummed, pushed the pebble closer. Jennifer kept the pebble. By the end of the second week, the station's AI had logged the behavioral changes. Meal times were now synchronizing with Jennifer's schedule. The cubs' activity patterns showed increased energy after her morning visits. Their vocalizations had expanded to include new sounds that suspiciously resembled human laughter, which is how she ended up in a meeting with Grennix and Bolmanth. The Coolanthy handlers were impressive in person, easily 3 times Jennifer's mass, their adult fur a deep midnight blue, with silver streaks that denoted age and status. They moved with the casual grace of apex predators who'd never had to worry about being prey. Their voices, when they spoke standard, had a resonance that made every word feel important. "We have noticed," Grennix said, settling into a chair that had been specifically reinforced for Coolanthy weight, "changes in the juvenile's behavior." Jennifer tried to look professionally curious rather than guilty. "Changes? They refuse morning feeding until a specific time," Bolmanth added. His standard was better than Grennix's, only slightly accented. "They position themselves facing the observation window. They become distressed if their routine is disrupted." "That's concerning?" Jennifer offered. Grennix's fur rippled through several colors. "We reviewed the security footage." "Oh, right. Security cameras." Because, of course, there were security cameras. Jennifer had somehow completely forgotten that her illegal breakfast club was being recorded in high definition. Look, she started. I can explain. Why did you share feeding time with them? Bulmanth interrupted, leaning forward. His 4 eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her very aware that she was talking to something that could, theoretically, bite her head off. Jennifer took a breath. It was an accident the first time. The pressure door malfunctioned. I was trapped in there. They seemed interested in my food. Then, the next day, they were waiting, and they wouldn't eat their own breakfast. And I thought maybe if I just... It was stupid. I know it was stupid. I violated protocols. The two Q-Lanthy exchanged a look, one of those wordless communication things that Jennifer had noticed they did constantly. Some kind of body language or scent, signaling that humans couldn't detect. Then Grenix made a sound that Jennifer's translator couldn't parse. It came out as static, with an undertone of what might have been laughter. "The juveniles have bonded with you," Bulmanth said. "I'm sorry," Jennifer replied automatically. "I'll stop. We are not distressed by this," Grenix cut in. "We are confused. You are not Q-Lanthy. You are not family pack. Why do they recognize you as feeding companion?" Jennifer blinked. "I don't know. I just shared some food. It seemed like the right thing to do." More silent communication between the handlers. Then Bulmanth stood, walked to the room's display panel, and pulled up a chart of the cub's developmental metrics. "Since you began this routine, all 3 juveniles show improved cognitive scores, better problem-solving, enhanced social awareness. They are thriving. They're also completely obsessed with a human," Jennifer pointed out. "That can't be good for a long-term study." Grenix's fur shifted to a warm amber color. "Perhaps the study is learning things we did not expect to measure." The meeting ended with Jennifer not being fired, which was a relief, but also not being told to stop, which was confusing. The handlers seemed more fascinated than angry. They asked her to keep detailed notes on the cub's behavior during breakfast time. They wanted to understand what was happening. So did Jennifer, honestly. That afternoon, she found herself back at the observation window, watching the cubs play. Whisper was teaching the other 2 some kind of game involving the puzzle boxes. Bounce was, predictably, bouncing. Stare was watching everything, while also somehow watching her through the glass. Her comm unit chimed. "Message from Commander Ikonala, the station's administrator. Report to my office regarding Habitat 3 protocols." Jennifer's stomach dropped. The handlers might have been fine with her breakfast routine, but Ikonala was a Venthari, insectoid, bureaucratic, absolutely devoted to rules and procedures. If Ikonala had noticed the protocol violations, she was probably about to get fired after all. The commander's office was in the central hub, zero-gravity section, which meant Jennifer had to mag-boot her way through corridors while her stomach did uncomfortable things. Ikonala was waiting behind a desk that was really more of a 3-dimensional web, since Venethari didn't sit so much as anchor themselves in space. "You have been entering Habitat 3 outside of scheduled maintenance periods," Ikonala stated. No greeting, no preamble, just straight to the accusation. "Yes, Commander," Jennifer admitted. "No point lying, when there was video evidence. You have been engaging with research subjects in ways not outlined in the study parameters." "Yes, Commander. You have established a behavioral routine that has altered the juveniles' feeding patterns." "Yes, Commander." Ikonala's antennae twitched in a pattern that might have meant annoyance or might have meant she was about to order Jennifer ejected from the nearest airlock. "Explain why you believe this is acceptable." Jennifer chose her words carefully. "I don't think it's acceptable. By the book. But the cubs weren't eating. They were showing signs of stress." I made a judgment call that their immediate welfare was more important than protocol. The Colanthi handlers could have addressed the feeding issue. They tried. It didn't work. I was right place, right time, right species, I guess. More antenna twitching. Then Iknala pulled up a display showing Jennifer's personnel file. You have an excellent record. Top marks in your field. Multiple commendations. Why would you risk your position for 3 juvenile aliens? Jennifer thought about Whisper's careful curiosity, Bounce's endless energy, Stare's quiet gifts. Because they're not just research subjects. They're kids. And kids shouldn't have to eat alone. The office was silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. IQ Nala's compound eyes reflected the display's light in a way that made her completely unreadable. You are ordered to cease all non-essential contact with the juveniles, the commander finally said. Feeding interactions will be logged and monitored. If the juveniles show any signs of distress due to your absence, the handlers will manage it. Jennifer felt something cold settle in her chest. Understood, Commander. Dismissed. She mag-booted her way out of the office, through the hub, back to the ring sections where gravity was normal, and her heart felt heavy. No more breakfasts with the cubs, no more Whisper's clicking sounds or Bounce's enthusiasm or Stare's gifts. Just back to protocol, back to procedures, back to keeping distance between observer and observed. It was the right call, the professional call. It felt completely wrong. That evening, she stood at the observation window of Habitat 3, watching the cubs settle in for sleep. They'd arranged themselves in a pile, the way young Colanthi did for warmth and security. But they kept looking toward the window, toward where Jennifer usually appeared in the mornings. They were waiting for tomorrow, for breakfast, for her. Jennifer pressed her hand against the glass, whispered, I'm sorry. Stare's eyes opened. All 4 of them. He looked directly at her, held her gaze for a long moment, then closed his eyes again. She wondered if he understood. If any of them would understand why the human just stopped coming. The next morning, Jennifer went straight to Habitat 1 for her scheduled maintenance. She didn't walk past Habitat 3. Didn't look at the observation windows, just did her job. Her comm unit started receiving alerts around mid-morning. All from the Habitat 3 monitoring systems. Meal refused. Juveniles inactive. Stress indicators elevated. She ignored them. Kept working. Let the handlers deal with it. By afternoon, the alerts had escalated. Juveniles still refusing food. Vocalizations indicating distress. Activity levels at concerning lows. Jennifer told herself it wasn't her problem anymore. The cubs would adjust. They'd forget about the weird human and her breakfast routine. Everything would go back to normal. By evening, Grenenix contacted her directly. The juveniles will not eat. We have tried everything. They are waiting for you. Commander Iknala ordered me to cease contact, Jennifer said. Commander Iknala is not Colanthi, Grenenix replied. She does not understand what you have done. What have I done? The handler's voice was quiet, almost sad. You made them feel safe, and now they do not. Jennifer ended the call, sat in her quarters, stared at the walls. 3 juvenile aliens, millions of kilometers from their homeworld, refusing to eat because a human wasn't there to share breakfast with them. She'd broken protocol to help them. Now following protocol was hurting them. The universe, Jennifer decided, had a really twisted sense of humor. And somewhere in Habitat 3, 3 cubs sat in a semicircle, waiting for someone who wasn't allowed to come. 36 hours. That's how long the cubs went, without eating. Jennifer knew because the monitoring alerts wouldn't stop. Every few hours, another notification. Juveniles declining food, stress hormones elevated, activity minimal. The handlers tried everything. Different foods, different schedules, enrichment activities, even attempting to replicate Jennifer's breakfast routine themselves. Nothing worked. The cubs would sit in their semicircle, wait for a while, then retreat to their sleeping pile. They weren't being dramatic about it, weren't throwing tantrums or destroying things. They just opted out. Quiet refusal, the most polite form of protest in the galaxy, which somehow made it worse. Jennifer spent those 36 hours doing her job, following orders, and feeling like absolute garbage. She ran equipment diagnostics, compiled research data, attended briefings, and the whole time there was this background noise in her head. 3 kids are starving because you're following rules. On the morning of the 3rd day, she got called to another meeting. Commander Iknala, both Kulanthe handlers, and a medical officer she didn't recognize, some species with too many tentacles and a name she couldn't pronounce. The juvenile's condition is deteriorating, the medical officer announced, pulling up biometric data that looked bad even to Jennifer's non-medical eyes. If they do not resume feeding within 24 hours, we will need to intervene with forced nutrition. Forced nutrition will traumatize them, Grennick said, his fur dark with distress. It violates their autonomy. It breaks trust. Commander Ikonala's antennae twitched rapidly. The alternative is allowing research subjects to harm themselves through starvation. They're not harming themselves, Jennifer said before she could stop herself. They're grieving. Every eye in the room turned to her. Compound eyes, diamond pattern eyes, whatever the medical officer had, all looking at the human who was supposed to be staying quiet. "Explain," Iknala demanded. Jennifer took a breath. "I'm not contaminating them or teaching them bad behaviors. They're social learners. They need trust-based feeding. It's the same with human kids who fail to thrive without bonding, or wolf packs that won't eat until the pack leader does, or primates who share food to establish relationships. I accidentally triggered something fundamental in how they process safety and community." "You are anthropomorphizing." "I'm recognizing a pattern," Jennifer interrupted, which was probably career suicide, but she was already committed. "Look at the data. Their cognitive scores improved when we ate together. Their social behaviors expanded. They weren't getting sick or dependent. They were thriving because someone finally treated mealtime like a social activity, instead of just refueling." Bolmanth made a sound that Jennifer's translator rendered as something between a sigh and a growl. "She is correct." Everyone turned to the Kulanthe handler. "On our homeworld," Bolmanth continued, his voice heavy, "juveniles always eat with family groups. Always. It is how we teach trust, establish bonds, create pack structure. The research protocols—" He paused, fur shifting through uncomfortable colors. "The protocols were designed by non-Kulanthe administrators. We were told this was proper scientific method. We followed orders." Grenninix's fur went nearly black. "We shamed our own species' needs, called them unscientific, and a human had to show us what we forgot." The room went very quiet. "You're saying," Commander Iknala said slowly, "that the station's feeding protocols violate the natural social structure of the species we're studying." "Yes," both handlers said in unison. The medical officer's tentacles writhed in what might have been the alien equivalent of rubbing temples. "This is going to require significant documentation." Jennifer felt something tight in her chest start to loosen. "So I can go back? I can have breakfast with them?" "No," Iknala said flatly. The tightness came back, worse than before. You will not return to Habitat 3, the commander continued, until we convene a full review board. If protocols are being violated at a fundamental level, we need to address this systematically, not with individual exceptions. The juveniles will need to— They'll be force-fed, Jennifer said. You said it yourself. 24 hours. That is the medical necessity. Jennifer looked at Grennix and Bulmanth, saw their distress, their shame, their helplessness, looked back at Iknala. Commander, with respect, medical necessity is what got us here. Following protocols without understanding them is what caused this. Those cubs aren't refusing food to be difficult. They're showing us we got it wrong. And your solution is to continue violating established procedures? My solution is to feed 3 hungry kids breakfast. Everything else is just paperwork. Iknala's antennae went completely still. In Venthari body language, that was either deep thought or homicidal rage. Jennifer wasn't sure which she was hoping for. You would risk your career, the commander said quietly, for juveniles of a species that is not your own? Jennifer thought about Whisper's careful curiosity, Bounce's joy at showing her things, Stare's quiet gifts. In a heartbeat, more antenna stillness. Then, the review board will convene at 1400 hours. Until then, all protocols remain in effect. It was a dismissal. Jennifer turned to leave. However, Iknala added, and Jennifer froze. If someone were to conduct an emergency welfare check on Habitat 3 during their morning routine, and if that check happened to coincide with their personal mealtime, I would have no reason to review that particular security footage until after the board meeting. Jennifer stared at the commander. Iknala's compound eyes gave away nothing, but there was something in the way her antennae tilted that might have been approval. Or might have been a test. Hard to say. Thank you, Commander, Jennifer said carefully. Do not thank me. I have done nothing. I am simply noting that equipment monitoring takes priority over other surveillance during potential habitat malfunctions. Jennifer left the meeting, headed straight for her quarters, grabbed 2 breakfast pouches, and practically ran to Habitat 3. The cubs were in their semicircle, waiting. When they saw her at the airlock, their fur exploded into golden orange, and the thrumming started up, so loud it rattled the barriers. Jennifer cycled through, opened the inner door, stepped into the habitat. All 3 cubs rushed her, not aggressively, just desperately, pressing close, making sounds she'd never heard before. Relief, joy, fear that she'd disappear again. I'm sorry, she told them, sitting down right there in the entrance. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have left. She opened her breakfast pouch. The cubs immediately settled into their semicircle, closer than usual, like they needed to make sure she was real. Jennifer ate. They watched. She shared. They took the food with shaking limbs, chewed slowly, then finally, went to their own meal and ate like they'd been starving for days. Which they had been. Jennifer sat there on the habitat floor, watching 3 alien children eat breakfast, and made herself a promise. No more protocols that hurt kids. No more rules that ignored what living things actually needed. Sometimes being human meant breaking the rules, and sometimes that was exactly the right thing to do. The review board took 3 hours to deliberate, and about 5 minutes to reach their conclusion. The station's feeding protocols for social species were garbage. Jennifer was technically right, even though she'd broken 18 regulations. And maybe, just maybe, humans were onto something with this whole caring about feelings approach to science. Commander Iknala presented the findings to the full research staff. Effective immediately, all habitat protocols will be reviewed for species-appropriate social structures. Feeding times will accommodate natural behavioral patterns, and researchers will be permitted, encouraged even, to engage with subjects in ways that support their psychological development. Which was administrator speak for, "We've been doing this wrong. The human showed us how. Let's not make this mistake again." Jennifer's breakfast routine became official station policy. Other researchers started implementing similar approaches with their subjects. Turns out, a lot of species did better when you treated them like living beings instead of data points. Who knew? The cubs thrived. Whisper's problem-solving scores went off the charts. Bounce invented 3 new games that the handlers had to document for the research archives. Stare's collection of gifts for Jennifer expanded to include pretty much anything that wasn't nailed down. 6 months later, they were ready to return to their homeworld. Jennifer knew it was coming. Had known from the start this was temporary. The cubs were part of a cultural exchange program. Learn about other species, bring that knowledge home, build bridges between worlds. It was important work, historic even. Didn't make the goodbye breakfast any easier. She sat in the habitat for the last time, 3 almost adolescent calanthe pressed close enough that she could feel their warmth. They'd grown. Whisper was nearly her height now. Bounce had muscle definition that suggested he'd be terrifying when fully grown. Stare's eyes had developed the silver rings that marked approaching maturity. "You're going to do amazing things," Jennifer told them, voice thick. "You're going to go home and teach your people about the galaxy, and they're going to be so proud of you." Whisper made a sound, not quite the happy thrum, something deeper. Sadness? Understanding? Both? Stare pushed one final gift toward her, a small piece of carved stone, shaped into something that might have been abstract art, or might have been a really bad sculpture of a human. Jennifer couldn't tell. Didn't matter. "I'll keep it forever," she promised, and meant it. Bounce, who'd been uncharacteristically still, suddenly pressed his head against her shoulder. The other 2 joined in, all 3 of them making this low, harmonic sound that vibrated through her entire body. The Kulanthe word didn't translate directly, but the handlers had explained it once. Family chosen. Not pack by birth, but pack by choice. Jennifer hugged them back, all 3 at once, which was logistically complicated with 6 limbs each, and didn't bother hiding that she was crying. Humans did that, cried when things mattered. The cubs didn't seem to mind. Later, after they'd been loaded onto the transport, after Grennix and Bolmanth had thanked her approximately 800 times, after the ship had departed, and Jennifer was alone at the observation window, watching it disappear into the void, Commander Iknala appeared beside her. "The Kulanthe government has requested," the commander said, "that all future juvenile participants in the exchange program include a human handler. Specifically, they requested you." Jennifer wiped her eyes. "I'm assigned here for another year. Contracts can be modified. Other species might want the same thing. Human handlers for their kids. Then we will need more humans." Iknala's antennae did something that might have been amusement. "Your species has a peculiar talent for emotional attachment. Most civilizations consider it a weakness." Jennifer thought about 3 cubs who'd learned to trust, to share, to treat mealtimes as more than just refueling. Thought about how that simple act, breaking bread together, had changed everything. "Yeah," she said. "We're real broken up about it." New research subjects were arriving next month. Different species, different needs, different protocols to rebuild from scratch. Jennifer was already planning the breakfast menu. Because here's the thing about humans that the rest of the galaxy was slowly figuring out. They packed bonded with everything. Give them a robot, they'd name it. Give them a plant, they'd talk to it. Give them 3 alien cubs and a terrible breakfast routine, and they'd burn down every protocol in the book to make sure nobody ate alone. It wasn't logical, wasn't efficient, wasn't what you'd call proper scientific method. But sometimes, just sometimes, caring too much was exactly what the universe needed. Jennifer pulled out the carved stone Stair had given her, turned it over in her hands, and smiled. Her comm unit chimed. Message from the transport ship, already 2 light hours away. Video attachment. She opened it. 3 Q-lanthy cubs, crowded into frame, fur cycling through happy colors. Behind them, Grennix was clearly operating the camera. Whisper held up something. A food packet. Bounce was bouncing, naturally. Stair just stared at the camera with all 4 eyes. Then, together, they made the thrumming sound. The one that meant family chosen. The one that meant, we're eating breakfast, and we're thinking of you. Jennifer laughed, ugly cried, and saved the video to her permanent files. Somewhere out there, 3 Q-lanthy cubs were probably already teaching their entire homeworld about the weird human who shared her breakfast. About how food tastes better when you're not alone. About how family isn't always the species you're born as. And somewhere on Research Station Calanthe 9, a human xenobiologist stood at a window, watching stars, already wondering what she'd share for breakfast tomorrow. Because that's what humans did. They showed up. They cared. They broke the rules when the rules were wrong. And they never, ever let anyone eat breakfast alone.